system transformation at the Rhode Island Department of Education. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. As such, we ask that you keep your microphones muted throughout the session up until the Q&A point where you'll be able to interact with the panelists. Before we start, I want to take a moment and thank all of the task force members and our honored guests who have joined us here today to be part of this conversation and this important effort. My role this morning is quite simple, which is just to call this convening to order. This is the first of a number of working sessions of the Rhode Island Learning, Equity, and Accelerated Pathways Task Force. Over the next month, we are looking forward to a comprehensive, data-driven collaborative process that will help guide our collective efforts to address the needs of our students and families that have been, in many cases, being exacerbated under COVID-19. This past year has been an incredibly difficult one for all of us. But throughout COVID-19, diligent planning and cross-collaboration has allowed us as a state to support our school leaders and students' needs in a timely, responsive, and equitable way. We have folks here from across our school communities today who have generously offered their energy over the next several weeks as we take a deep dive into how we can best accelerate learning for our students through data-driven policies and programs that can be implemented now and in the upcoming years. This is not a short-term issue. In many cases, the learning gaps have been persistent. This is going to be our collective work for the foreseeable future. On the screen, you can see our agenda for this morning and afternoon. The Q&A session will be managed by our task force co-chairs, Deputy Commissioner Anna Riley and Superintendent Jim Ernakis. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Rhode Island Commissioner of Education, Angelica Infante Green, to say a few words and introduce our distinguished speakers this afternoon.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for making the time to join us as we do this important work. We feel very honored and privileged to have the panelists that we have today. We're lucky enough to have the person that I'm going to introduce in a few minutes, which is our new governor. But I want to thank also other elected officials that we have here today. Senator Cano is here with us, and we have Joe McNamara, who I have relied on as we do this work. So we all know this has been an incredibly difficult year. We know that. But I consider myself lucky to be in Rhode Island. And I know everyone says this, you're not really a Rhode Islander. Well, guess what? I'm here in a pandemic, so I'm a Rhode Islander. So sorry, that gives me a pass. But what I've learned about being in Rhode Island is that we can get things done. Right? When other places shut down, the moment we shut down our schools, we were already planning on how to bring them back. That was the conversation. We did summer school. You know, every time there was a challenge, we talked about mitigating. How are we going to do this? It was never about, oh, we can't do this. It was how. It was always about the how. And we had the foresight. I don't know if it's foresight, but we put out an RFP for interim assessments throughout the state, so we can still have statewide data. That was important for us. It was important to know where our kids were, are, and where they will be. This is not based on overall generic information, but it's going to be about our kids. Data is extremely important for us as we move forward. So we took that on. We gave out the RFP. Our districts took it in, monitored progress, because it's not okay for us to say that there's a gap. What do you mean there's a gap? We don't know what that gap is. So we intentionally are not talking about learning loss because we don't want to go back to where we were. People are like, oh, there's going to be 8 months, 10 months learning loss. That's not what we're talking about. Our kids were already behind to begin with. So we don't want to go back. We don't want to make up time. We want to use this opportunity to really lay a strong foundation and propel our kids forward. That's what this is about. This is what we're going to do. And here in Rhode Island, we can do that. Other places didn't come back. We came back in September. We moved the agenda because of the people on the screen that you see here today, because everybody was moving in the same direction. We said that it was important to be in person, and we did that. We have been back and we have been going strong. So I know that if we can do that, we can do anything. So I feel very proud of where we are, but also where we're going to be. So I have the distinguished honor to introduce to you our new governor. I don't know if to call you governor, lieutenant governor, but all I know is that you are our partner, a governor that really understands education, that really is committed to making sure that we are the best. And Governor, you've got a team that's going to do that. We are ready to go. We are going to show you that we can make Rhode Island the best state in the nation, and we are highly competitive. So I'd like to turn over the floor to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And yeah, you've earned your stripes here. You're a Rhode Islander, and we're really happy to have you here for sure. Thank you so much. I want to just commend the core group that's on this, that helped launch this effort today, and look forward to working with each and every one of you. I also, it's a great privilege to have former Secretary John King on with us as well. I know how important it is to have national people perspective on issues that are in Rhode Island or any state, but Rhode Island in particular. And I was fortunate to be on Secretary John Duncan's mayor's task team when he was secretary, and I know the influence that both former and current secretaries can have on Rhode Island. So welcome, John. I really appreciate you here and your interest in Rhode Island. Yeah, this is definitely a determined group, as the commissioner just said, and I put myself in that category as being very determined about working on behalf of helping our young boys and girls in the state of Rhode Island reach their highest potential. And I think that, as the commissioner said, that job is never done. We are always achieving to do our best, and I always have said that doing your best is hard work. So what we're doing here is hard work, and I look forward to working with everyone here. I've said publicly as a mayor that I felt as though that education was the issue of our time, and I continue to believe that's true. We know that the pandemic has hit Rhode Island hard in many ways, but it has, regardless of how hard our teachers and our administrators work. I'm a current member of a school board right now for the last 13 years, and I understand, because I understand when the administrators tell us what's going on, whether the teachers, the parents, and the students. So I understand the challenge that's ahead of us, and for you to hit this head on, like you are, Commissioner, and with this team, I think is very critical and very important. So all the heroic efforts by our teachers and all our administrators out there, I want to just recognize that, and also congratulate you for wanting to be, move forward in a way that really matters to our students. This has impacted students throughout all our 39 cities and towns. And I've said over and over again, it doesn't really, in this case, there's lost learning because of the circumstances, not because of what our efforts in terms of relationship to our efforts to educate our kids, but it's going to hit high income, low income, moderate income. It's going to hit public school students, public charter school students. It's going to hit our private school students. And so we need to be really thinking about all the young people that live in our state, boys and girls, impacted equally in all 39 cities and towns. And I look forward to working with you to make that a reality, that we're going to really achieve at high levels and overcome these obstacles. I think that obstacles bring in opportunities. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity to use the resources that are going to be coming from the stimulus in a way that we really launch ourselves into the future in a dramatic way. I also do believe that it's a priority. It's going to be a priority for my administration. When I'm governor, it's going to be the same priority as when I was lieutenant governor or mayor of our town, or president of our local Boys and Girls Club years and years ago, or when I coached these young kids in the gym for years as well and understood exactly what's going on. And they're still in my life today, the kids I coached, and their kids are going to do the Pledge of Allegiance when I actually get sworn in 10 days or 12 days from now. But I also think the teachers are a priority on this vaccination thing. I'm working very hard to get up to speed with the governor's team, Governor Raimondo's team, on the vaccinations and the importance of that. But I also do categorize and put priority on the teachers because they are working hard for the futures of our students. That makes them essential. That makes them essential workers in the state. So I want to thank everyone for being on today. I thank you for the invitation. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you to achieve this goal that we have to really excel in a way that helps our students in their futures. And I'll hand it over to our chair, Barbara Cotton, and the Board of Education chair for her comments. And thank you again for having me here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And I will add my thank you to you, Lieutenant Governor McKee, for helping us to shape this work and for being a staunch supporter for education. I see that we have many familiar faces from our school communities throughout the state here today, and I'm honored to be part of that process, a process that's deeply important to us on the board. We've heard time and time again through public comment and presentations from the RIDE staff that our children have faced immeasurable challenges this school year and last school year when we abruptly had to shift to distance learning. And I think we're all reading the preliminary studies that have recently come out suggesting that many of our students will be returning with a significant loss of learning, particularly in math, along with the intense social and emotional impacts of the crisis that we're going to need to address. So when the commissioner brought this new task force proposal to us, I agreed that this was the proactive approach that we needed in Rhode Island, because as she said, we need to accelerate the learning of our students, not just remediate what has been lost this past year. We knew that before COVID, and it's ever more apparent now. So I think the commissioner referenced that the team at RIDE started this work last summer with a summer school. And they presented the results to the Board of Education this past fall. And we saw terrific results for our students, measurable increases. So I know we can do it. We've also identified resources for interim assessments and mitigation and testing that will give us statewide information on where our students' learning currently stands. So I'm excited to hear from a great list of educational experts that we have, beginning with former Secretary King. They will inform our work, we'll review the data to drive our focus, and together we can create the paths forward. So I'm excited today. I will now turn it back to the commissioner.
Thank you. I just have to say, because Barbara's very humble and modest, but she drives us hard to make change and make sure that we're on the right path. And I truly appreciate having that partnership and that continued commitment. So Barbara shared about our summer program, and when many other states, if not almost all, were closed, we ran a summer school. So we were being innovative and pushing the envelope. And one of the things that we did is that we brought kids in from all over the state. What COVID has given us is this opportunity. We had kids from our urban learning with our suburban. That was pretty awesome. And we also, what we did was that we had the kids help us design the courses. Help us. So guess what? We had like 99% attendance every single day because they had a say. So I know that we have national voices here, but we have local voices because it is really important to get this done together. And we have to, whatever we come up with here, we have to involve the students, the teachers, the superintendents, everyone. We have to do this together and we have to move the needle. And this is about acceleration. What we saw this summer is that there was a 50-point gain on the SAT on average for the kids that participated. So we can do this and we're going to do this. And I have to give credit where credit is due. My team has been awesome, 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 awesome. I don't normally get to say this with the former Secretary of Education, but I think I have to take the opportunity because they have really gone above and beyond. And I include the superintendents, I include the principals, the teachers, because we have made it happen. And I don't want to take any more time. I'm excited about the work that we're going to do, but we're going to lead. We're going to lead. And now we are going to turn it over. Kelvin, are you introducing him or am I? I am. Okay, great. So I have the honor of introducing our former Secretary of Education. Um, I also had the privilege of working for John King, Dr. King. But what he always said, there wasn't one meeting that I had with him where he didn't ask this question: is it good for kids? Is it going to be controversial? Maybe, but is it good for kids? Then do it. Let's do it. And that was the North Star always. And that's what's guided my vision, is what I've learned from him. And it's not always easy, it's not always popular, but it's the right thing to do. And that's the question we need to ask ourselves. Is this right for kids? And if the answer is yes, let's do it. So he has created this vision of equity, of making sure that all kids get what they need. And that may mean different things for different kids, but always leading with the passion and the dedication to make those tough decisions, but always think about the community at large and understanding that education not only impacts the students, but families and communities. Our communities cannot thrive if our education system is not strong. So I am humbled to have him here. And I will tell you, I send him a text and he texts back in 5 minutes. I'm in. So the commitment that you have to the work that we're doing and the work that you have dedicated your life to, I am very honored for you to be with us today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Angelica. So look, let me first say I'm inspired by the leadership in Rhode Island, the partnership between the governor, lieutenant governor, board chair, the board, the commissioner, her team, to all have worked so hard to try to help our kids navigate what has been just an extraordinarily difficult period, and to work in partnership with teachers and administrators to try to make sure that we are doing all we can for kids. So I'm grateful for the leadership here and just honored to join all of you. I really want to get into our discussion, but I thought I would spend a couple minutes just kind of framing what I hope the task force will think through in the coming weeks and months. And so a little bit about the landscape that I think we face. First, let's acknowledge that we are in the midst of dealing with really multiple pandemics. We have the pandemic of COVID-19 and the health consequences, and certainly we've seen that those health consequences have disproportionately impacted low-income communities and communities of color. But we also have an economic crisis that remains real. We have a lot of folks who've lost jobs, who've lost income, folks who have lost their homes or are at risk of losing their homes, folks who are food insecure. And so we have this very real economic pandemic alongside the health pandemic. And then we have this pandemic that has always been with us as a country of systemic racism and its implications for our society. And, we had this moment last spring of a long overdue national reckoning with issues of racial justice. But these issues are grounded in our history as a country, the role that slavery and Jim Crow and segregation and anti-immigrant sentiment have played throughout our history. And that has an impact on our kids, our families, and also it has a psychological impact as folks are working through seeing these images of conflict around race, seeing the images from January 6th, seeing the images of people walking through the nation's capital with a Confederate flag. All of that takes a toll as well. And so we gather for this conversation amidst these pandemics, knowing that there has been this very real toll on students. Certainly Chair Conham talked about the academic toll on students. We know that there is this unfinished learning that students have experienced. The McKinsey study suggests that there's, that when we emerge from this crisis, that we'll see 6 to 12 months of unfinished learning, as we say at Trust, in mathematics. But I suspect many of these studies understate the academic toll of this period. Whether kids have been virtual or hybrid, or even if they've been in person in these very disrupted patterns of schooling, I think there's a significant academic consequence. Some of the early studies on unfinished learning, I think, have understated the number of students who were missing because they didn't participate in the assessment. Some of these early studies haven't taken into account some of the other data indicators we have, like grades. In Montgomery County, Maryland, where I live, the failure rate for freshman English is 6 times what it was pre-COVID. And all across the country, we are seeing in grades, we're seeing in attendance, in chronic absenteeism, the impact of COVID. We're also seeing the impact on post-secondary planning. FAFSA completion is way down nationally. College enrollment is way down nationally. We had a double-digit decrease in community college enrollment nationally this year. So there's this very real academic toll, but there's also a very real socio-emotional and mental health toll. Again, for the kids who are virtual or hybrid, there's all that lost social time with teachers and peers. But even for the kids who are in classrooms in these very disrupted patterns of learning, they're also often missing some of the extracurriculars, some of the opportunities for relationship building with peers that are so central to the role of school in kids' lives. I always share with folks, for me, school saved my life. I was a kid for whom, if I had been without the relationships at school, as many kids in the United States have been for nearly a year, I don't know that I'd be alive today. My parents passed when I was a kid, my mom when I was 8, my dad when I was 12. The thing that saved me was relationships at school. A series of phenomenal New York City public school teachers who made school safe, engaging, compelling, interesting. After my mom passed when I was in 4th grade, it was just my dad and me. My dad was struggling with undiagnosed Alzheimer's. And so home was scary and inconsistent. But school was the place where I had certainty, reliability, where I could be a kid when I couldn't be a kid at home. And so I think about all the kids that we have who, again, whether they're virtual or hybrid or in person in these disrupted learning patterns, they are missing those essential relationships. So we have a lot of work to do, I think, to address that socio-emotional mental health toll of this period for kids, not to mention the kids who've lost loved ones, who have loved ones who have been sick, the kids who have experienced the economic disruption to their families. And it's worth saying that in addition to the academic impact, the socio-emotional impact, there has been a very real consequence for kids in the economic disruption. There's a recent study from the census suggesting that maybe as many as 40% of Black and Latino families with kids are struggling to reliably put meals on the table. It's very hard to learn when you're hungry. Right? It's very hard to learn when you are moving from house to house. Maybe you're not identified yet as homeless, but you are underhoused. You do not have a reliable home. And we know that part of the backdrop of this is the inadequacy of our digital resources for kids. Too many kids don't have devices, don't have reliable internet access. That was all true before COVID, but COVID has put that into sharp relief. I know this has been a huge priority for Rhode Island. I appreciate the aggressive early leadership that the Rhode Island Department of Education took on closing that digital divide, but it remains a challenge nationally for many of our low-income students, for many of our rural students. For students who maybe they have the internet, but it's not very reliable, so it's hard to be on Zoom for all your classes on those hybrid days. So we have big challenges there. So amidst all these challenges, a few thoughts on how the task force might move forward in the work. As the governor said, we are expecting significant additional federal resources. We have the resources coming from the last stimulus that was passed at the end of last year. We're expecting Congress to act on President Biden's request for $130 billion for schools. A few things I would prioritize as you think about that. Obviously, to the governor's point, we've got to get our teachers and our school staff vaccinated as quickly as possible. I think that will help build folks' trust and confidence in being in school buildings. We've got to put resources towards testing. And I know this is a place where Angelica and her team have been very focused. We got to make sure that we have good surveillance testing so that we can identify outbreaks, stop them before they become outbreaks, quarantine cases as appropriate. So we've got to use resources for that. But then we've got to think about how do we, as Angelica said, how do we accelerate learning? And I think part of that is intensive tutoring. We have good evidence nationally around the power of high dosage tutoring, but it has to be done well. There have to be high quality curriculum materials. There has to be good training for the tutors. There has to be a reliable feedback loop so tutors know if kids are making progress and where they're still struggling. The tutor-student relationship has to be central and has to be consistent. Right now, if we can make those things true about tutoring, the evidence suggests that we can help students catch up fairly quickly and accelerate their learning, move them forward. And we've got some promising work happening in this space around the country. Think about former Tennessee governor, Governor Haslam, who himself, through his philanthropic efforts, funded a Tennessee tutoring corps last summer to match college students with high needs elementary school students to get them additional support, particularly around reading. So and one of the things that he did that I think we all need to do is look at the data, figure out which efforts were impactful, where did kids make gains, how do we build on that, where did they maybe not make gains, how do we make tweaks to our programming to ensure that they make as much progress as possible. I hope that will be how you use some of the new stimulus money. I also hope that there'll be a broader expansion of national service ahead of us. Senator Coons has a bill on that. I think national service has the benefit not only of getting us more tutors, but also of giving young people a sense of community and contribution to their country. So I hope we'll see that. So tutoring is one. Two, you talked about the summer programming that you did last summer. I think that is an important bet. Randy Weingarten of the AFT and I wrote an op-ed on this actually last April, calling for a big investment in summer learning. It's a huge opportunity, again, not only to add more academic time, but also to engage kids in interesting new ways, right? The summer could be the time where you're blending arts with academics, where you're blending athletics with academics, where you're getting kids to do fun STEM creative projects, science experiments, and they're also learning math and reading and writing as they do those projects. So summer can be this really powerful time for not only kids' academics, but their connection to school and their sense of community. The third area of focus has to be counseling, mental health services, making sure that every kid has a meaningful relationship with an adult in their school community. I mean, all the evidence around the science of learning, even for kids who've experienced significant trauma, the thing that we can do for them, in addition to addressing their academic needs, is to create those powerful relationships with an adult that will help build their resilience, help give them a sense of security and safety, communicate to them that they are loved and seen and cared about. And so figuring out how do you, through tutors, through summer, through relationships with teachers, how do you make sure that every kid has that powerful relationship with an adult? The next thing I would say to focus on, How do we improve the post-secondary transitions? We cannot afford to have a generation of students who are left only with a high school diploma. There just aren't that many good jobs in the 21st century economy for those who have only a high school diploma. So how do we make sure that we are reconnecting students with post-secondary opportunities, supporting those transitions? And then finally, how do we make sure that we have good feedback loops? We need information about who's struggling, who's making progress, who needs more support. We need that disaggregated by race. We need that disaggregated by income. We need to look hard at what supports our English learners need, our students with disabilities. So I hope those are all topics you will tackle as a task force. And I hope you'll do it in the spirit of saying that this has to be, forgive me as a former high school social studies teacher for framing it this way, this has to be a New Deal moment. It is not good enough to go back to February 2020 because February 2020 was deeply inequitable. Right? This has to be a moment where we actually, as President Biden says, build back better, right? Where we actually lift our sights and take on deeper structural challenges. So as you do the work of this task force, I think you also have to be thinking about, well, how do we continue to build momentum around high quality curricular materials in the state? How do we continue to build momentum around diversifying the teacher workforce racially and in terms of language? We have more bilingual teachers. How do we continue to build momentum around access to advanced coursework, whether that's AP classes or dual enrollment or high quality career and technical education? How do we do this work in a way that continues to build momentum around partnerships between schools and community support providers so that we're addressing a range of needs: food insecurity, healthcare needs, vision needs, dental needs, adult education opportunities for parents, right? All the big bets that you've been thinking about beforehand, this is an opportunity to integrate those big bets for transformative change with the effort to address the consequences of COVID. And with that, let me turn to questions and just having a discussion and excited again about what you all are doing and the commitment to center equity in these conversations.
Just as a reminder for everyone, we encourage you to submit questions through the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat for questions. If you could please keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking and keep questions topic specific. We are looking to get as many voices heard as possible so that we can hear multiple perspectives. And if you use your raise hand function, we can monitor the questions and call on you to unmute and speak. We'll do them in the order that they come in. Thank you.
As we wait for questions, I'd like to ask you one. I want to kick it off by asking, what is how do you think the role of race plays into the intersectionality of what we need to do moving forward as we start thinking about acceleration, especially for the kids that have been, that are personally impacted? But one of the things that we learned this summer, John, was that we brought together students from all districts. And we had students from the urban and the suburban, and the kids in the suburban were so upset that they really didn't understand what was happening in the urban school system. And they wanted to be part of that change. And they got together and they have become leaders. They have never had opportunities to learn together. So could you talk a little bit about the value of something like that, or just your thoughts on it?
Sure. Well, two observations. One is, it's interesting, as a country, we've had this moment where we've disrupted so many of our existing arrangements, even to the level that kids are all learning from home. And yet we've still stayed intensely committed to our district lines that separate kids often by race and class. And so we haven't chosen to seize the opportunity to think differently about that and to create opportunities for kids to have relationships across lines of race and class. So I'm inspired that you're doing that. I think one of the challenges is, how do we build curricula that help students to navigate these conversations? I'm joining you from Silver Spring, Maryland, where I live. My great grandfather was enslaved about 25 miles from where I'm sitting in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And the property where my great grandfather was enslaved is owned by a family that were direct line descendants of the family that owned my family. So I've gotten to know them and have spent time on the property. The cabin that my great grandfather lived in is still standing on the property. And one of the things I've been struck by is, although they've been very gracious to our family and we've really built a great relationship, even growing up on a plantation, even growing up in a state with a long history around slavery and racial inequity, they didn't spend much time thinking about the institution of slavery and learning about the institution of slavery. And we haven't, as a country, been willing in our history curriculum to grapple with the hard questions, to grapple fully with slavery, with Jim Crow, with redlining, with segregation, with Japanese American internment, with all of these moments where we've fallen short of our values as a country. In our English language arts curriculum, too often kids don't see themselves reflected. They don't see themselves reflected in the authors they read and the stories that they engage with. And that's a problem not only for kids of color, but for white kids too, because then white kids aren't getting to see the world through the eyes of people different from themselves. And so bringing kids together, I think, is crucially important. Training teachers around how to support kids across building relationships across lines of race and class is critical. But I also think we've got to tackle the curriculum and think deeply about how we build really an anti-racist curricular approach.
I think I'm brought up because I have a question. Good afternoon, everyone. K-Char Bradford joining you from Providence Public School District. Very excited to be part of this group. And we are grappling with the same challenges that you all discussed today. And we're also looking at, we have a good menu of some solutions. How do you recommend prioritizing student groups and the supports that you're matching to students based on their needs? And we're looking at it kind of like what all students will need returning, to school, and then specifying either grade bands or looking at attendance patterns, or what are some of the ways you're seeing to prioritize either by special ed or multilingual students? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's such an important question. I mean, three quick observations. One is we have to have the information. We have to have the data. We have to look at all the patterns around assessment outcomes, but also attendance, engagement, the observations of teachers about who's been struggling. So leveraging the data, I think, to target our resources, critical. Two is within school buildings, really being systematic, kid by kid, in trying to identify who's struggling, but also what are their assets that we can leverage. One of the programs that we funded through the Investing in Innovation grant program in the Obama administration is called Building Assets, Reducing Risks. I don't know if they work with schools in Rhode Island, but that's a program that was started by a school counselor in Minnesota. And what she saw was that in her high school, immigrant students, low-income students, students who would be first in their family to go to college, were getting worse grades and were more likely to drop out. So she went to her superintendent and she said, look, what I really like to do is have teachers and counselors meet every week about students and talk through how they're doing, and do two things: identify who is in need of intervention and make sure there's an adult who's connected to them who can support their needs. And two, identify what kids' strengths are that we can leverage and tap into and celebrate. Are they great athlete? Are they great artists? Are they someone who really likes helping other people? And can we leverage that? And this program showed in a randomized controlled trial significant positive impact on grades, attendance, high school graduation. She then got federal funding, replicated this program across multiple schools. So again, saw randomly assigned students significantly better outcomes. And now it's being replicated around the country. But the thing I love about it is just the intentionality about talking as a school team about individual students and what their needs are. The third observation I would make is we have to look at, particularly for our special education students, compensatory services. I mean, one of the things I hope people will use this $130 billion for is to make up for the time that kids haven't had with their service providers. And it's true for special education students, it's true for English learners who've had less of the sort of interactions that might drive language acquisition. And so I think we have to commit the dollars to this work, and that may mean spending more, should mean spending more on those students who are most vulnerable.
Thank you. Really good.
Yes, Angela.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. King. I have to admit we're cheating. There's some people over here that are listening to your words and getting very excited. So we took the opportunity to do an all call. So thank you so much. You know, one of the things that we struggle with as a small community is changing the higher thinker picture to really be much more intentional by way of how we serve communities of color, poor children, families that are disengaged, undereducated, underemployed. I'm wondering what your thought is on that, because I believe in Rhode Island at a grassroots level, there is a lot of energy and momentum to do systemic overhauling. But when you think about the higher ups who are making decisions regarding our children, their education, their services that they receive, they most likely don't walk like them, talk like them, look like them. So I'm wondering if you could offer some insight to that.
Yeah. It's a very difficult question. I would say two observations. One, I think there is this moment where people are more conscious about how inequities operate in our society. And we've got to help people bridge their consciousness to action, right? So if you think about how many institutions, big corporations, higher ed institutions, foundations put out statements last spring of solidarity with the movement for racial justice. You know, they expressed their belief that Black Lives Matter. Maybe they even put a sign on their lawn that Black Lives Matter. But have we really translated that concern with social justice into the necessary actions? And I think we have this opportunity to help people see, well, if I'm committed to issues of racial equity, then I've got to look, is my higher ed institution admitting significant percentages of Black, Latino, first-gen, low-income students? And if not, what are the barriers I need to remove to do that? In my school district, are kids of color, low-income students, English learners getting the same access to advanced coursework opportunities? So I think there's a mirror, holding up a mirror opportunity that we have. So that's an appeal to justice. I think there's also an appeal to what you might characterize as enlightened self-interest. And this is true in Rhode Island, it's true nationally. If we don't educate low-income students and students of color, we have no future as a country. Majority of kids in the nation's public schools are kids of color. Majority of kids in the nation's public schools are eligible for free or reduced price lunch. And so if you're an employer, that's your future workforce. And so you have a stake in their educational opportunities. If you are an elected official, those are your future voters. You've got a stake in their readiness to participate as in civic life. So I think, you know, we have to make both the justice appeal and the self-interest appeal. But I don't want to suggest it's easy. I think that is hard organizing work that we all have to do. Let's see, maybe I'll go.
Hey, I'll help you out there, John. Andrew, can you go next?
Sure. Thank you, Secretary, for outlining both the opportunities and the challenges that are ahead of us. I wanted to ask your thoughts about parents and their roles here, and specifically, what advice do you have for parents who, after so many months, may start to question whether their child is ready, either academically or socially and emotionally, to progress to the next grade come fall 2021?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we have to do a lot of trust building around what supports children are going to get. I think one of the things that's happened during this period, particularly in places that have been virtual or hybrid, parents have been, we've broken down some of the barriers to parents seeing, what happens in classrooms, what their kids' experience is. And I think we've got to convince folks that we are not just passing kids along, but that we're going to provide intensive supports. And, if schools aren't planning now, and this is not just for Rhode Island, but nationally, if schools aren't planning now for summer 21, summer 22, the potential of extended school days, extended school year, I think that would be a mistake. We've got to show folks that we are going to provide the support that kids need. And, we've done polling at EdTrust. Parental stress is through the roof across the country. That's even more true for parents of students with disabilities. So, if we let parents feel like we're just going to act like, next September is just a regular school year, I think they'd be right to be skeptical and to demand more. So I think there's a commitment we have to demonstrate, and then we have to figure out how do we help parents as partners support their kids' learning. And, again, I think this period of virtual and hybrid has broken down some of the barriers. I was talking with a superintendent who had 10 times as much participation in their parent events on Zoom as they had in person, because people didn't have to travel, they didn't have to get childcare, and they could participate. It lowered the barriers to participation. That's a good thing, but now we got to leverage that, not just to come to the meeting, but how can we be partners? And that's going to require school districts to build more communication tools with families than they've had, including some school districts that have done a poor job, particularly around translation and communication with families who speak languages other than English, really committing the resources to doing that, committing to the translators, and not just relying on the teacher who happens to speak Spanish, but actually hiring a translator to engage with families.
Thank you. So Renee, Paige, and Hillary will go next. So you can go right after. And then I have Dr. Wong and Lisa Nelson.
Thank you very much first for this opportunity to be part of the panel. It's a wonderful experience for me, and I'm honored to be working with such an eclectic and knowledgeable group of people. So thank you. Also for our panelists, thank you very much for taking the time to meet with all of us to really develop some type of plan that will support our students and our families. My initial question was really geared towards families. And so Andrew, nice to know we're on the same page. However, I did have a little bit of an extension. And so Dr. King, could you maybe share a little bit, we hear the saying, it takes a village, we are a community. And I want to take a moment to really zero in on the statement that the commissioner made earlier. Commissioner, when you said we want to use this as an opportunity really to lay a strong foundation and propel us forward. So I want to acknowledge as well, someone had written in the chat that teachers, are figuring this out. Some of them, it's like a first year of teaching. So Dr. King, maybe you could speak a little bit about how we can really be more of a community, involve our community members, but also the state of Rhode Island is so small. What might be a suggestion to connect, maybe cross over from one district to the next? I don't know that we do that as well as we could. So I'm looking for some of that to expand beyond just our teacher capacity, but really be that village to help our students propel forward.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think there's an opportunity for sort of a collective impact strategy here, and to say, for example, as we look ahead to the summer, how do we make sure that every kid is meaningfully engaged this summer? And that may mean that businesses step up around summer jobs for students. I was struck that last summer in Boston, the city partnered with a number of their major employers, banks and others, to provide virtual internships for students. But they were committed that they weren't going to abandon summer jobs because of the pandemic. So we should have a strategy as a community, and Rhode Island's small enough, to do this. How do we ensure every kid? Some kids will be at summer school. Some kids will be in summer camps and summer programs in the community. Some kids will be in summer jobs. So how do we make sure that there's not a single kid in the state who is just sitting at home without anything to do? Right. And to me, what collective impact, why I like the collective impact model is because you agree on a measurable outcome across sectors. What would it take to say that there's not a single senior in the state who's going to graduate without a meaningful post-secondary plan? And how do we have higher ed step up to help families navigate the FAFSA? How do we have higher ed institutions maybe use some of their stimulus dollars to offer opportunities to kids? Northern Virginia Community College last summer offered free, they picked 5 online classes. They offered them free to any junior or senior in the Northern Virginia region. And they were a range of classes. They did cloud computing. They did, I think, maybe psychology. I mean, the range of classes, but high interest. And some of those students ended up now going to Northern Virginia Community College. So it was in their interest to do it. They used CARES Act dollars to do it. So how could you say we're not going to let any senior fall through the cracks this year? We're going to make sure every kid makes that transition and bring everyone to the table around that. I'm very concerned about medical care and whether or not families are doing the regular medical care. I mean, we've got this health crisis, but are people doing their pediatrician visits? Are people getting their kids proper vision care so that they have their glasses? What would it take to say schools partnering with faith leaders, partnering with hospitals, partnering with clinics to make sure that no family has missed their regular medical care? One of the vaccine worries we have from a public health perspective is our young children getting their regular vaccines? And are we at risk of having some outbreaks of diseases that we thought we'd conquered because of a lack of vaccination for our young kids during COVID? So, that's why I say figuring out what are some common metrics and then working together to achieve those.
Great. I think I'm next. Secretary King, I'm Paige Closhas Parks. I'm a senior policy analyst at Rhode Island Kids Count. Thank you so much for being here in Rhode Island, and I'm so grateful to join this task force of some really awesome and amazing people. Thank you so much for raising up relationships that students have with schools and the value of that, and how this task force really needs to continue to hone in and look at that as part of our strategy. At Kids Count, we've been partnering with a variety of youth organizations and out-of-school time professionals to really define student-centered learning and really honing in on budgetary investments and legislation to increase and improve school climate in Rhode Island. So as a task force, I have a question for you in terms of how would you recommend we bring in the discussions around school climate, and particularly looking at how our youth organizations or out of school time providers, what we learned in this pandemic, have really been the glue between our schools and communities and students? How do we build on those relationships, especially if we may not have the current data metrics that really can show us how to improve on those relationships so that we don't go back to where we were before, but we build stronger?
Such a great question. So a couple of thoughts. One is those organizations, those partner organizations, after school providers, summer providers, big brother, big sister programs, mentoring programs, they have been hit hard during this period. They are resource constrained. In some cases, they've had a lot of difficulty operating. In some cases, philanthropy has pulled back in ways that are difficult, or folks who usually have their annual benefit that drives their fundraising for Big Brother, Big Sister, they haven't been able to do that. So getting resources to folks so that they can continue their work and seeing them as a part of your task force strategy, I think is hugely important. How can they play a role in the tutoring? How can they play a role in the planning for summer 21, summer 22? I think talking to folks about their experience and what they need is very helpful. I'll put in the chat, we did this paper recently at Trust on socio-emotional learning and racial equity. And the paper, the way we did the paper was we did focus groups with students and parents of color around the country and asked them what's their experience and what do they need. And one of the things that we took away, and you'll see in the paper, is this very strong relationship between folks' experience of school policies and their level of trust. So it's very hard to believe the school when they say they want to do SEL work if you have African-American girls suspended from schools at 6 times the rate as white female students, right? It sends a very confusing message. We care about your socio-emotional well-being, but we have these huge racial disparities in discipline. So part of what we argue in that paper is that there needs to be a lot of intentionality about centering racial equity as we think about socio-emotional learning and relationship building. It's hard to build a relationship with your English teacher if in your English class you never see any authors of color and you're a student of color, right? Or said another way, that conversation about the text that centers characters of color could be the breakthrough moment that helps you build that relationship. I would say to folks, I remember the moment I read Down These Mean Streets, because it was by a Black Puerto Rican author about a Black Puerto Rican experience, and I am Black and Puerto Rican, and that was the moment where I was like, wow, this is a story about somebody who looks like me, right? And so how do we do that? That's right, Perry Thomas. How do we, somebody said in the chat, the author, right? How do we make that experience available to students to be that moment of relationship building?
Right, Hillary, you're next.
Thank you, John. It's fabulous that you're here inspiring us, and I loved your holistic view and vision and engagement and intentionality. I run the Providence After School Alliance, which is modeled after Expand Ed and Task in New York City, and know your support of their work, and Boston After School and beyond. And we have a national group. And you should know that our state probably is one of the best models in the country for its 21st Century Learning Center after school community that is really leading the charge on social emotional learning in its work. And I think is really asking really leading questions around that connection to equity. So my question kind of builds on what Paige was, because she's a colleague and a fellow troublemaker, was sort of suggesting. What role do you see the out of school time world playing? I think one of the things that concerns me is we've been working very hard in the social emotional learning and starting to explore the equity world and really looking at metrics that Jen McCombs is going to come talk about, who helped guide our several cities on how to do the SEL metric work right. Where can we make that kind of contribution? I'm a little worried, as you say, under-resourced nonprofits, then trying to all do tutoring when their expertise in our state has been social emotional learning. And how do we lift that up? Fearful that everybody runs to tutoring when that's not actually what their sweet spot how do you balance that and offer up this menu so everybody can get engaged in whatever way is right for their needs? I feel like you're offering us a menu of options.
Yes, yes. I mean, I hope that the task force will tackle this and not pit SEL work and academic work against each other, which I've heard in a few places over the last few weeks. Makes me very anxious because I think as a sector, we are given to false dichotomies. And this is a place where we should see them as integrated. Now, I do think that after school providers can be intentional about trying to figure out what are kids' academic needs and how might we help to address them. So maybe it's that students, you're worried about students falling behind in English language arts. I don't think tutoring necessarily should mean do more of exactly what they did in school that day. Tutoring could mean, we're going to have a book club around the Angie Thomas book, and we're gonna read that together, and we're gonna talk about it together, and that's gonna support kids' progress in English language arts while doing the relationship building in the setting of our after school teen center. And I think people can do that also through technology. I mean, we're still dealing with the pandemic and its implications, but I see this with my own girls who are in 9th and 12th grade. Like, they're a little bit resistant, but at the end of the day, they so want connection. And so if you create that book discussion group virtually, again, kids may complain at first, but they'll come and they'll talk and they'll get engaged. And so how do we help people also in the after school space and summer space think about smart adaptations given the constraints of COVID?
Okay, Dr. Wong and then Lisa Nelson.
Hi, Dr. King. Thank you so much for your presentations. Very inspiring. And I teach at Brown University, run a program in urban education policy. So I've been following your work very closely. And so what I was triggered by your comments on collective impact, as well as your comment just now to Hillary's in terms of connecting after school and the school day. And my question is on system improvement. How do we move the system forward by taking advantage of this opportunity to really leverage maybe one or two key drivers going forward? So I'm just thinking that even though right now we may have billions of dollars in stimulus money, but as you know, stimulus monies come and go. So after 2-3 years, how do we think about institutionalizing proven practices and strategies in our system so that we can perhaps rethink the whole Carnegie unit, rethink the silos culture that sometimes the state and local agencies might be encountering and complacent with, and maybe think about, the definition of a school year and a school day, and also the opportunity for remote and hybrid learning and teaching. So I just want to hear perhaps one or two drivers that would guide this task force to think about system capacity building.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think even in your question, you framed some of the things I hope that you'll take up as a task force. We've had this period of using technology. I worry in a lot of places the desire to go back to how it was before is so strong, and there's a chance that we will then miss some important lessons for system change from this period of leveraging the technology. So a couple examples. My view is we should never again tell a kid, you can't take that class because we don't offer it in this building, right? Because we've seen that we can break down that barrier. Right. And so if a kid wants to take French and we don't have French in this building, we can make it possible for them to take French or, AP World History or what have you. And so how do we change the system so that that's possible going forward? We also have had places, I'm sure this is true in Rhode Island, it's true around the country, where folks have said, let's figure out who on the team is the most dynamic, effective presenter of this content, and they're going to do the mini lesson, and that's going to free up other teachers to use that time to give feedback on student work or to do tutoring or to work with small groups of students. Why do we all have to, on our 7th grade team, deliver the same mini lesson? And so I think there's an opportunity to ask as a task force, you know, what has technology allowed us to do during this period that we actually want to keep? And then the other thing I would say, when I think about system change, I'm sort of partial to the work of Tony Brank on continuous improvement. And I think one of the habits that we should be trying to figure out is how do we build that habit of continuous improvement, you know, feedback loops, listening to the students and families about their experience. And, you know, we've all had to struggle, as somebody mentioned earlier, like first-year teachers through this period. But hopefully that's made us kind of more open to feedback loops where we're constantly making adjustments.
I'm going to move it along. After Lisa, Charmaine, Senator Cano, and I think we only have 10 more minutes. If we didn't get to you, please put your question on the chat and we will try to get to you. We'll see if we can go quickly so everybody can get a chance.
I hear you. That means shorter answers for me.
Thank you for being here, Dr. King. I'm Lisa Nelson from the Rhode Island State Senate. I'm the Education Policy Analyst. And you mentioned that we need to make sure every kid is engaged in summer programs, especially over this summer and the following. And I found that many times students who do participate in summer programs or expanded learning opportunities are the ones who need it the least. So I'm wondering if you have ideas or strategies for how we can best engage the students that we struggle to reach to make sure that they are aware of the opportunities and indeed taking advantage of them.
Yeah. Such an important point. You know, two things. One is I think we have to be just dogged about the communication with families. And, you know, if that may mean that we have to go to where they are, it may mean that we need to, you know, call 10 times, not just the one time. It may mean that we need to make the forms easier to fill out, right? It may mean that we need to be more attentive to translation issues for families who are not English speakers. But my sense is we often have barriers. When I was a principal, we designated someone on our team at our middle school who had as part of their job, she had a reduced teaching load so that she could spend time making sure every kid had a meaningful summer activity. And there were families, it wasn't until she showed up on their door or multiple times before she got them enrolled in that summer opportunity. So that's one. Two, I think enlisting the kids in this effort as well. Like my experience is there's maybe no more effective advocate than a middle schooler who really wants to do something. You know, they will be super persistent with their parents. And so sometimes that could be the hook, is how do you get kids to see what's possible for them and to be motivated. But part of why I like the collective impact model is we all have to feel responsible for that outcome. Like I want the church pastor at that collective impact meeting thinking about, oh, that person's in my congregation. Let me talk to them. Let me help them get into that summer after school opportunity.
Okay, so it's Charmaine, sorry, and Senator Cano afterwards. Charmaine, I hope I'm saying your name correctly.
Thank you very much. Yes, you are. It's Charmaine. I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I am a representative of the Watch Coalition, Woonsocket Alliance to Champion Hope, as well as PLEA. So I would like to speak to, the idea of getting our basically what the last person just said. How do we get the people that are not showing up to things to actually show up? I am a part of the parent committee, and that is ultimately my responsibility for Watch, that we're just getting off the ground. So with that being said, I feel like it's about bringing our village together and holding everyone accountable. Everyone loves it when we hold our politicians accountable, but it's also about making sure that we're holding our parents and our students accountable to themselves and to each other. With that said, my question is, taking a look at what other communities are doing, and I just read something today that North Smithfield is actually lowering its passing grade to a 65 from a 70. Is that something we should be looking to do, or is that a Band-Aid on a much larger problem? Because probably at 70, kids aren't really where they would need to be in the first place. Like, is that something that we should be trying to look at? Or should we be looking to actually raise the bar a bit higher to again to propel us forward in a way that we're not looking to go back to where we were in February of 2020?
Important point. So just quickly on the first point about parents and parent participation and reaching the people who are hard to reach. I will say, from the standpoint of a practitioner, thinking back to being a principal, I mean, and you know this, Charmaine, like, if you have food, that helps. If you have childcare, that helps. If you provide transportation, that helps. If the folks are in a community where you'd have to take a bus to get to school, like, let's do the parent event at the community center in the housing development so that folks don't have to travel as far. Like, the lowering of barriers, I think, is the thing we can do as an institution, as a sector, to make it easier for folks to participate. On the second point, I mean, it's yeah. I guess I would ask, and some ways I want to ask the question back to you. What are you seeing that you are most hopeful about?
I'm most hopeful about the idea of access. Like we spoke to, we're finding out that we have a lot more resources with technology and such to be much more engaging. So that keeps me extremely hopeful, and we can keep children tied and engaged in a way that they've been brought up on and that they're used to. I just want to know, I'm literally getting educated on a daily basis to try to do the work. And I just want to know, should we be trying to lower the bar for a bit and then raise it? Should we not ever try to lower our low bar as it stands? Should we only be trying to elevate our children? Are we only trying to lower the bar so that we can meet certain criteria? That, again, what was our original thing? Is this what's best for the child? Is that not really, as I'm sorry, Angelica mentioned in the beginning, is that I'm going to lead with that from now on. First of all, I just want to say that I'm going to put that into my mantra. Is that what's best for the child? Sometimes we have to look at things from like a bigger picture. So maybe it is. I just want some expertise from the people. Right. So that's my assumption. But when I saw that in the paper today, I couldn't fathom how that would be better for the child as opposed to not the system getting a certain result that it wanted. When I said right, I was responding to Angelica's shaking of her head. Thank you.
Yeah. I guess part of why I ask you what you're hopeful about is because I think that I worry that the framing of the question that we're doing as a sector, like whether it's 65 versus 70, or how we are talking about pass rates. Now there are people who are saying, well, the, you know, if pass rates are lower, we should just pass everybody, right? That framing of the question actually isn't the thing we care about. The thing we care about is, are kids engaged and learning? And so when I asked you what you're hopeful about, you didn't say, well, I'm hopeful because I know these 4 kids got a 69.5 and it got rounded to a 70. Like that, nobody's hopeful about that. What's hopeful is like, these kids are on fire about math. And so to me, the thing we have to press people to think about is, how do we put our all that energy that we are allocating to what I would call distracting debates. How do we put that energy towards getting kids engaged and supported around the learning? Because I believe if we focus on that question, we're going to make a lot more progress, right? And so I don't know that keeping it 70 is also not alone going to help kids do better at math. The question is, how do we get kids with the support they need to do well in math? Anyway, now I feel like I'm preaching. I gotta say.
I feel like I did that.
Great. So this is our last question, and no 5-part questions, please, because I want everybody to have a chance. Senator Cano, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. I am very excited to be part of this conversation today, and it's great to see so many familiar faces that I respect, and I know that you're all here to really do this work together. So that's great. I want to say, Dr. King, I am really inspired by what you had been saying today over all your presentation. I took a new challenge this year, and I just became the chair of the Education Committee in the Senate. That is a lot of responsibility, but it also, I know that we need to really work together. And one of the things that I wanted to just knowing that I'm such a fan of summer programs and learning extended opportunities for learning, expanded the opportunities for learning. I had 2 of my former boards here in the call, Hillary Salmons and Alice Molina. They know that I started a PASA, so this is something that I have dear and near to my heart. But one thing that is true, and Dr. Wong has helped, for example, the Senate with the formulation of the funding formula of the state, is that the resources are not always there. And that is a concern to me. So how can we make sure our financial resources reach all students when our current funding formula isn't structured for summer and extended learning opportunities? And just to tap it up, how can we make funding system more equitable as a whole? So I want to make sure that you give us your feedback on that. I know we have a lot of work to do, and I'm really looking forward to engage in this work together. And I really appreciate everybody. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for the question. So we'd love to work with you on that at Ed Trust. I will say two quick things on this. One, in the version of the stimulus package that is moving through the House, there's a provision called maintenance of equity. And the goal of that provision, something we've been arguing for a long time at Ed Trust, is to say that when states get these federal dollars, they need to commit that they will protect their highest needs schools and districts from cuts. Because what happened, as you all know, in prior recessions is that when cuts were made, the burden disproportionately fell on high needs communities and high needs schools, particularly in terms of losing teachers. And so that maintenance of equity provision is designed to prevent that and to put, to my mind, some pressure on states to take a look at their funding model and look for opportunities to better equalize funding. So that's one. Two, I think when we're thinking about school funding models, we have to think about directing more resources to the kids with the greatest needs. And too often, I think we have the conversation as though the goal is just equal. And I think the goal has to be equitable. And to me, that means that we need to be spending significantly more on our English learners, on our students with disabilities, on our students who are significantly behind academically, on our young people who are at risk of dropping out of high school. our disconnected youth who've already dropped out, who we need to bring back into school and get on the right track. So, I hope as you have this conversation about school funding, that the push will be, how do we get even more resources? I mean, we as a country just have it so backwards. We spend the most on the kids who have the most advantages and the least on the kids who need the most. And so, part of building back better should be reevaluating how we fund our schools, to my mind, moving away from property taxes, which we over rely on around the country. And realizing that the additional spending on our highest needs kids, we will make that up on the back end when they are in good jobs, contributing to the economy. We will save money on incarceration and social services. It is a smart investment. So, Senator, I'd love to work with you on that, and if we can be helpful in any way.
Thank you. Very looking forward to do it together. Absolutely. I think that what you say is right on point. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Well, thank you all for the opportunity to spend time with you, and for all the hard work. And I just, I think about the teachers and administrators who are figuring out how to get social distancing done in the classroom and figuring out how to make online learning work, and the parents who are juggling their job with supporting their kids, and the parents who work outside of the home and are trying to figure out how do they make sure their kids are on top of their learning. And just thank you, everyone on this call, for all that you're doing on behalf of kids and families.
Thank you, Secretary.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Deputy Commissioner Anna Riley, and now that we have all been inspired by Secretary King, I'm going to take you through a brief presentation framing our work as the LEAP Task Force. So I'm going to share my screen here. So just starting off with the folks who are members of our task force, thank you all for agreeing to join us and do this very important work. I won't take you through all these names, but this is posted on our website if you want to take a look at who our colleagues will all be for the next several weeks together. I want to start by focusing on our mission and vision here at RIDE, and it really is threefold. To lead and support our local education agencies through a unified strategic direction for education in our state. To use policy, advocacy, and governance structures to create the environment that advances opportunities for students. And finally, to maintain collaboration and efficiency in our department to enable innovation, agility, and continuous learning throughout the state. And our vision is for each and every student in Rhode Island to think critically and collaboratively, and act as a creative, self-motivated, culturally and globally competent learner. We want our students prepared to lead fulfilling and productive lives and succeed in academic and employment settings and contribute meaningfully to society. And throughout our work together on this task force, we'll be focusing particularly on equity, excellence in learning, and engaged communities, so that we can provide support and resources for all of our LEAs to meet the needs of students. This is a quick timeline of where we started and where we are today. In June, when we realized COVID wasn't going to be over at the end of that school year, and that it would certainly lead us into this school year, we began the process of really looking at how we could collect and assess the data on our students. And you can see that throughout the last several months, we have been doing just that, so that we have data that will inform our work in the next several weeks. And so our approach is going to engage in a participatory, evidence-informed, data-driven process, so that we can understand not just the academic impact, but also the social emotional impact of COVID-19 on our students. And in partnership with all of you, we can provide recommendations that inform both short-term and long-term strategies, in addition to aligning our resources. I'm going to quickly go through our goals. So of course, as I mentioned, assess the impact. We're going to do that by analyzing academic and non-academic data. And I want to tell you that we have already begun some of that work. We have partnered with the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and we are doing work with them across our state. We will continue to do that and expand that. And as the secretary mentioned, and as the commissioner mentioned, we are also committed to tutoring and already have some one-on-one and small group tutoring in a partnership with schoolhouse.world, which has partnered with the entire state to provide tutoring for all of our high school students, both English and math for 6th grade through 8th grade in addition to that. So we have started some of the work and we will continue to move through that work. We will engage with national experts. As you know, we had Secretary King today. We have a lineup for you for the rest of our sessions. And our goal will be to identify those research-based, high leverage strategies to address the root causes of what the needs of our students are, provide guidance, and align stimulus funding to those priorities. So here's our lineup, a lot of work in the next 30 days. Let you take note of some of the dates here as we move through the process. You can see some of the experts in the field that we have lined up to meet with all of us. And then our goal will be on that last by March 16th to have some recommendations to share out, to bring to the commissioner to be ready to share with our community and all of our stakeholders. So just in case you thought you were going to get off easy, one of the things that you will get is some homework that will be emailed to you in advance to read and prepare for our next sessions. When we email that out to you, we will also work to respond. If you didn't see in the chat, we did note that if there were additional questions, we will share them both with Dr. King and our team here at RIDE. We'll respond to those. We'll get those out to you when we send you your homework. You should expect to receive that email this week. We want to thank you for all of the time that you've given us today, and a special thank you to Dr. King for his participation. It was both insightful and inspiring for all of us. Our next meeting will be on Tuesday, February 16th at 8:30 a.m. And if you have any questions between now and then, please feel free to reach out to us. We do have an email that you can reach us at, LEAP taskforce@ride.ri.gov. Let me say that one more time here, LEAP taskforce@ride.ri.gov. We'll put that in the chat as well. Oh, there it is, and it's on the screen for you. So again, I want to thank you and hope you all have a great day.